Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our ad hoc Budget Advisory Committee meeting. We will not be going into closed this evening, so if I could have a motion to convene an opening at 5:06 p.m., please. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall and seconded by Councillor Cressman. And all of those in favor? Okay, no one opposed, so that carries. Before we pop into our moment of reflection, I do just want to acknowledge for the viewers joining us that Councillor Sadhu did send his regrets for today's meeting. Now, moving on to the reflection, I wanted to start our meeting by acknowledging the passing of former Mississauga Mayor Hazel McCallan. She passed away Sunday morning at the age of 101, and for those that don't know, Hazel was one of Canada's longest-serving mayors. She was mayor for over 36 years, retiring at the young age of 93 years old. On behalf of Council and Wilmot Township, I want to extend our deepest condolences to Hazel's family and friends. I would also encourage people to read some of her stories and achievements. As Premier Ford said upon her passing, Hazel was a true definition of a public servant. And with January drawing to a close, we are looking ahead to February and Black History Month. This is a time to pause, learn, and celebrate the many achievements and contributions of Black Canadians. The 2023 theme is Ours to Tell, encouraging stories of Black Canadians' success, sacrifice, and triumph. There are various events across the region for opportunities to learn and to engage, and more information can be found on the Township website. I would also like to just say, not to let this month be the only point that you engage with Black history, as it is a larger part of all of our community's history. I would also encourage anyone interested in local history to take initiative and look up the Black settlement established in Queensbush and Wellesley in the 1830s. It's just a very cool piece of our local history that I was unaware of until last Black History Month. Now, with that, I will turn it over to Councillor Martin to do the land acknowledgement, please.
Thank you, Mayor Salonen. We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Now, there are no additions to the agenda for this evening, and I will recommend that the agenda as presented for January 30th, 2023 be adopted. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, a seconder, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? Thank you very much. No one's opposed, so that motion carries. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Okay, great. Seeing no conflicts, we will move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. The recommendation is that the minutes of the following meeting be adopted as presented. Ad hoc Budget Committee meeting, December 12th, 2022. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favor? Thank you, and that motion carries unanimously. This evening we have no public meetings and we have no presentations. And there is nothing on the consent agenda. So before we hop into the reports, I'm going to pass it over to our CAO Chambers, as she would like to have a few words.
Good evening. This evening, our Director of Corporate Services and Deputy Treasurer will be presenting a number of reports outlining the Township's financial performance over the past year related to operating, capital, and reserve fund activity. 2022 was my first full year with the Township, and it's been a transitional year. As an organization, we are facing significant pressure as we prepare for coming growth, and as such, we've made some necessary shifts, including a realignment of the Township's leadership team to support a greater focus on long-range planning, project management, and effective service delivery. High inflation continues to be a major factor impacting the Township's financial performance, with both capital and operating costs coming in higher than anticipating than anticipated and resulting in an operating deficit of approximately $136,000. We've also taken on debt for the first time in many years in order to fund critical infrastructure projects required for residential and employment land growth. Staff are continuing to compile information for the 2023 base operating budget, which will be presented on February 13th. And with that, I will turn it over to Patrick and Ashton to present this evening's reports.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, thank you, CAO Chambers, for the brief introduction. As stated in the opening, this year did result in a projected deficit. That is not something that's been uncommon across municipalities in our province, given the results of the past year, the still impacts from the pandemic and the inflationary environment we're in. So the report does go into quite a few details regarding how we got to the deficit that we're projecting. I will highlight that our 2022 budget was prepared with a number of assumptions, particularly in the area of community services, where we didn't quite know what the outcome of return to in-person services was going to be following the pandemic. We're happy to see that with the gradual return to in-person services, overall activity levels have risen and exceeded the expectations for the 2022 fiscal year, exceeding budget by approximately $358,000. Additionally, as you've heard through the Bank of Canada announcements, several interest rate hikes throughout the year yielded higher than anticipated investment income, which also came approximately $357,000 over our budget estimates. That's obviously the good news. While revenues were better than anticipated, the Township also experienced unanticipated expenditures, particularly within the areas of fuel and utilities. Those costs exceeded budget by over $200,000, and legal fees and insurance costs were also well above what we anticipated for 2022. The combination of the aforementioned factors, including the impacts of our 2022 capital program, arrives at our projected deficit of $136,540. In order to fund that without affecting the dedicated transfer to our infrastructure reserve funds, staff will be drawing from the Township's working funds reserve to hit a balanced fiscal year for 2022. Attached to the report are the operating statements, various note disclosures for each line, budget line, including the user pay divisions. I want to thank my staff team within corporate services. A lot of work goes into compiling this information to be at the hands of this committee, so you have an understanding of where we're at going into the next year. Also referenced within the report, we're anticipating that these statements that you're seeing tonight will be updated moving forward into 2023 to be in a format that better aligns with the new corporate structure, which CAO Chambers noted. Staff will work to ensure that the information you see in future reports will be comparable, so you'll see 2022 budget and actual in the new format, and then the proposed 2023 budgets, again, that's coming forward at the February 13th meeting. Very capable corporate leadership team is here to answer any questions that there might be from committee, and I'll open up the floor to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Before we get into questions, if we could please get the operating budget onto the floor. So the recommendation is that report COR 2023-03, prepared by the Manager of Finance / Deputy Treasurer regarding the 2022 operating budget versus actual for the year end December 31st, 2022, unaudited, be received for information purposes. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall and a seconder, seconded by Councillor Cressman. And I will open the floor to any questions. Okay, seeing no questions from council, I will now call the vote. All of those in favor? Great, no one's opposed in that case, and the motion carries unanimously. Moving on to 12.2, we do have a delegation for this item. We're first going to put on the floor the motion, and then we will invite the delegate who's joining us virtually. So the recommendation is that report COR 2023-04, prepared by the Manager of Finance-Deputy Treasurer regarding the 2022 capital program for the period ending December 31st, 2022, be received for information purposes. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, and may I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Martin. So now I will call on the staff to enable Dorothy Wilson, our delegation via Zoom, to join us, please.
Excuse me, Mayor. Do you want staff to outline the report prior to the delegation or following it?
After the delegation.
Okay,
thank you. Hello, Dorothy. Thank you very much for joining us. I just want to quickly go over some reminders. I know that you've done this a bunch of times and come to council, but just for the general public watching, you will have up to 10 minutes to provide your delegation tonight. As this is a budget meeting, just want to ensure that remarks are in the scope of the agenda item that you're delegating on. And should you have any comments or matters that are not on the agenda, I would advise you to speak directly to staff, as outlined in the Rules of Procedural Bylaw of 2021-36, Section 7.98. Now, with all of that out of the way, Dorothy, I will give you the floor for your up to 10-minute presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Mayor Salonen, Wilmot councillors and staff, members of the public. My name is Dorothy Wilson, and I'm here today on behalf of the Wilmot Ecumenical Working Group on Indigenous Settler Relationships. And just so that you know, my delegation does have to do with an item on the capital program that has to do with the Prime Minister's Path consultation. The Wilmot Ecumenical Working Group has been based in Wilmot Township since 2017. We began meeting to consider how this community could respond to the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of 2015. Our membership includes representatives from 6 local churches, plus community members without a church affiliation. Our overarching goal is to facilitate relationship building between Indigenous and settler members in our community. One of the ways we have been doing this is to host events that help settlers gain understanding about the history of Indigenous communities in this area and beyond. We are fully aware that our group has a lofty goal and that each individual's journey to better understanding and improved relationships is unique. Our group was involved in the consultation process that was undertaken by the First Peoples Group in 2021. We support that group's recommendations. At this point, we feel strongly that the township should proceed with carrying out the second recommendation, which is, quote, creating a working group comprised of a balanced representation of the individuals and communities within Wilmot Township to discuss, develop, and suggest plans for the implementation of next steps towards community cohesion and healing, unquote. Without this process, the divisions that occurred in our community as a result of the Prime Minister's Path will continue and will prevent Wilmot from being the cohesive, vibrant, and welcoming community that it strives to be. In reviewing the agenda package for this meeting, I have noticed that in the section about the Prime Minister's Path consultation, $45,000 was budgeted as an expenditure for 2022. I have a question regarding whether any of this money was earmarked to carry out the First Peoples Group recommendation that I just mentioned. I'm not aware that the recommendation has been acted on to date, but if it has, that would be great news. I certainly hope that the budget for 2023 includes funding to implement and/or continue with this important work. At the inauguration of the Wilmot Council in November, Mayor Salonen, you acknowledged that the divisions that exist in our community, and you talked about the importance of honest, open, and frank conversations that include all voices. The recommendation proposed by the First Peoples Group is intended to facilitate such conversations with the goal of improving Wilmot. The members of the Wilmot Ecumenical Working Group on Indigenous Settler Relationships strongly support the Township moving forward with this recommendation as soon as possible and making sure that there is money available in the budget to assist. Thank you very much for your time.
That's great. Thank you very much, Dorothy. To answer your question directly on the $45,000 in the 2022 budget, I'm going to pass it over to CAO Chambers for a response.
Yes, and thank you for your presentation, Dorothy. We've certainly had some good conversations with your group over the past year, and I do want to acknowledge the good work that you're doing in assisting the community to learn. We did have money in the 2022 budget to proceed with this project, and we're pursuing funding through CSMARI through the federal government to support recommendation number 2 within the First Peoples Group report. We continue to advocate to MPP Lewis for those funds to come forward, but to date we have not been successful. We will be bringing forward a project to complete stage 2 of the First Peoples Group report in the 2023 budget. As we know, we need to proceed with that. And so regardless of funding, there will be a project coming forward in the budget to dispense with that this year.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And Dorothy, do you have any additional questions then to that, or?
No, I'm happy with the response that Sharon gave, and I just thank you very much for listening.
That's great. Well, thank you again very much for joining us, and I'm sure that we will see you in future delegations, and please do feel free to stick around for the rest of the meeting via our online links if you'd like to continue to watch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, now I will call on Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer Patrick Kelly to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair Salonen. This report follows the format for quarterly updates on the capital program, and it's a summary at the end of fiscal 2022. As noted within the report, it's anticipated that 42 projects from that list were completed and will be closed, leaving 68 initiatives to be carried forward into 2023. With the completed projects, a number of them, as you'll see, did come in over budget and under budget. Compiling all of those that are being closed requires approximately $17,000 allocation from the levy, which was noted in the previous operating report to balance out those projects. For other funding sources, such as development charges, infrastructure reserve funds, their impacts will be further outlined within the subsequent report on our reserve funds. As of the end of fiscal 2022, $14.4 million in approved funds are unexpended, with a significant portion attributable to the Wilmot Employment Lands Project and other infrastructure-related, growth-related infrastructure initiatives. Attached, you have the capital statements with comments to the status of each project. Staff are here to answer questions that you may have on any individual projects. I will note we are reviewing, again, similar to the format in which the capital statements are presented moving forward into the 2023 fiscal year. One key piece or questions that have come from staff as well as previous council has to do with the first column. The first column in that, to be clear, is the current year capital budget, not the full budget that has been set aside for this project. We are looking to provide that information in a better format going forward. The second column is the better one, I guess, to get an understanding of where we're at. It does show you all of the funding that's currently available in the capital program and how much has been spent, so you get a true picture of the amount of financed and unfinanced capital within there. Again, we're here to answer any questions you may have on any of the projects, and I'll hand it back to Chair Salonen.
Thank you very much, and I will open the floor to councillors. Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Patrick, I just wanted to, you know what? I've just answered my own question, so I think I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you, Councillor Dunstall.
No problem, anytime.
Any other questions, colleagues? Okay, seeing no more questions, I will now call to vote. All of those in favor? Great, that passes unanimously. And moving on to 12.3, the recommendation is that report COR 2023-05 prepared by Manager of Finance / Deputy Treasurer regarding reserves and reserve funds for the year ended December 31st, 2022 be received for information purposes. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin and a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Cressman. I will now again call on Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer Patrick Kelly to introduce the report.
Thank you once again, Chair Salonen. Combining the fiscal impacts of the previous two reports is how we arrive at the attached schedule, which incorporates transactions that occurred in 2022 towards our reserve funds. The dedicated infrastructure levy, you will see there, net funding of capital projects. That'll be how much we had budgeted to transfer to capital projects, and then for projects where we would have needed additional funding or return of unspent funds, that's in that column. Interest accumulation and contributions received from external funding sources. One of the most notable items within the attached statements is the status of our development charges reserve fund. And if you'll give me a little leeway here, I might explain what's going on, because the province has tried to explain this before, and I'll add clarity to it. As referenced within detail through the report, a significant accounting adjustment happened when we took on debt financing within the DC for cash flow purposes. What that transaction does is makes it to appear as if our development charges reserve funds are in a better state than what they are. The province's recent reports indicate that DCs are in very good condition across this entire province, because it excludes debt financing within the DC. You'll see within the report that our DCs have now moved to having a small deficit position. Of it, I believe it's in the 300,000 range. I don't have that right in front of me. But a significant portion is debt financing, which is not showing there. So I want to be clear with this council that the future growth that we talk about, the oncoming growth within this municipality is what's going to clear that deficit, put us back in a positive position, but we need development charges and collection of development charges to fund future infrastructure projects. I really wanted to underscore that. Lastly, as referenced in the report, the Township's reserve funds are currently under review as part of an existing work program project on a debt management and reserve fund strategy. We're looking at a way to better streamline the reserve funds with our operating capital and asset management needs. It's anticipated that we'll be bringing forward a debt management and reserve fund strategy to this council within the second quarter of the year. I'll close by saying there's studies recently across the province about the status of reserve funds. Wilmot Township within those studies does not show as having significant reserve funds. We have operated pretty close to what we need for the past several years. We have learned through our asset management practice that we rely on infrastructure reserve funds, on dedicated infrastructure levies to ensure we have the funding in place to move forward with our capital programs. So that's not to be taken lightly, and then we appreciate this council's support in the first budget meeting of our dedicated infrastructure levy. It's an important piece of the puzzle. We're here to take any questions from council on reserve and reserve funds.
Thank you very much, Director Kelly. Yes, Councillor Cressman.
Yes, I must admit, with the money coming in and going out of funds, it can be a challenging exercise to understand what's going on. I've been used to financial statements with retained earnings, profit, sitting down at the bottom. If you're eating up your retained earnings, it indicates you're heading backwards. And then to see money coming and going and placed here, I remember a statement you made in our background that we have to have a balanced budget, and then you can go and rob from Peter to pay Paul, or vice versa, from funds, or put it in. And so that was certainly. I still don't think I've figured it out completely. All to say, I think on page 3 there's this your referral to 2MI consultants, streamlining the number of funds. And I think you had another in another report, you had obligatory funds, and then you almost had, I wouldn't say they were discretionary funds, but to a degree they were. So are you going to consolidate some of them, or maybe I'm talking in the wrong direction here? Yes. So is that what your goal is, or what is the goal of that consultant's task?
Through your chair, Saladin. So the objective is to streamline some of the existing reserve funds. However, there are some legal agreements with some other ones, or even legislation behind it, like the DC, like we can't consolidate those. But just to align with the capital needs, our asset management plan, there's some reserve funds that we believe currently can be consolidated into one reserve fund instead of multiple, to make this as well, also from a council perspective and a public perspective, easier to understand as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification there, Ashton. And I do just want to clarify, I appreciate your candor there, Councillor Cressman, but we are not robbing Peter to pay Paul. So just want that to be on record. Are there any other questions from any council members? Okay, with no more questions, then I will call the vote. All of those in favor? That's passed unanimously. And moving along to 12.4, the recommendation is that the report COR 2022-6, prepared by the Manager of Finance and Deputy Treasurer regarding the annual debenture update, unaudited for the year ended December 31st, 2022, be received for information purposes. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, and a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Cressman. I will now call on the Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer, again, Patrick Kelly, to present our report for us, please.
Thank you once again, Chair Salonen. This report is the first time I've presented a report in my long career with Wilmot Township on our annual debenture update. Up until this point in time, there were no levy or DC funded debt, or was none for quite some time, I should say. The only existing debt that we've had for the past several years is towards the St. Agatha water system, which is collected directly from the benefiting landowners and not from the general levy. The attached statements outline debentures issued for various capital initiatives as were approved by the previous council, and that debt was issued in the fall of last year. As noted in the attached statement, it's anticipated in 2023, I should say it's known in 2023, that $185,000 of funding of debt financing next year will be required from the levy. That's a new cost. The remaining $471,000 in debt servicing costs will be derived from development charges. The annual payments are based on a 20-year term, but are renewable at year 10. We, through our debt management strategy, which hasn't been formalized completely and is coming forward, we have made it clear that we will not issue debt for a term that's longer than the life of what we're purchasing. So, for example, if we took debt on a large piece of fleet, we wouldn't spread that debt over 40 years when the fleet's only going to last 10 years. Lastly, as referenced in the prior reports, the township's currently undergoing that strategy. It's anticipated it will assist us in guiding the utilization of debt, assisting staff and council in the utilization of debt, and that'll be brought forward again in the second quarter for your consideration. Staff are here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Director Kelly. Any questions, colleagues? Councillor Cressman?
Through you, Mayor, I was puzzled in the 10 versus 20 year, and that was an informative comment that it was a 20-year repayment. Just further to your comment about balancing it against its useful life, I'm certainly cognizant of that in the wider business world. Trunk sewers, I'm interested in knowing what's the expected life of a trunk sewer, because they are major investments, and I'm hopeful they're more than 20 years.
Through you, Chair, I can answer that question. Typically, through asset management, we would estimate between 80 and 100 years of useful life.
Yes.
And through you, Chair Salonen, I'll just add on that we're not permitted to take on debt that has a 80 to 100-year repayment schedule.
That's good to hear. Councillor Cressman, did you have a follow-up question to that?
No, I found this very helpful, and the charts following it, once I understood what they were referring to, very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilkinson, did you have questions?
Yeah, I was just looking for more information, or through you, Mayor Salonen, looking for more information regarding the debt we took on for the third ice pad selection, design, engineering, and construction. Given the outcome of our last meeting, sort of the direction that we took, what we may be able to do with that, or what the current status is. Thank you.
Through you, Chair Salonen, that's an excellent question. Thank you. As far as debt issuance, in order to be able to issue debt, it needs to be we need to provide evidence that council has approved a project to go forward. So for doing so, if council's approved a budget allocation to it, that justifies the need for us to issue debt. It was included in the debt issuance in the fall of last year, given the opportunity with the interest rates, which were expected to go up even more, to get in there. Having said that, now that the project is under review, we need to go back to it would be through the region first to discuss what our options are on there. Optimistically, we would be able to reallocate that debt towards a different initiative if the third ice pad were to be delayed out further than this time frame. But that's a discussion we've yet to be able to have with the region, and we'll be doing so and come back to council.
Thank you very much, Director Kelly. Any follow-up questions? And I'm just going to take that quick opportunity for those watching at home. I know a few people have asked about what that motion on the third ice rink meant. It is not that we are saying no to a third ice rink. I just want to make that clear. So you may continue to see it pop up through budgeting as we go along, as that is still something being considered, just not in the form it was in. Yes, Councillor Cressman.
Yes, given that we haven't done a lot of debt financing or very limited debt financing, and then taking on the quantity of debt financing that we did last year, I just, for my own comfort, I don't think this is, we take it lightly. Give me a little bit of the rationale. These major projects, we couldn't realize the benefit of the employment lands if we didn't do it. I would assume that's where we're talking, but I'd hate to have us running out and getting on a continuing basis debentures to manage shortfalls.
Sure, and you are a little bit ahead of the curve here as far as our debt management strategy that's going to be coming forward, but it ultimately will have council approval on that debt management strategy, and a key piece of that is the types of projects and initiatives when we will consider taking on debt. If you see the listing in the absence of a formal debt management strategy, I think staff on our team and through the CLT group have did an excellent job of ensuring we're not taking on debt for projects that don't necessarily need to occur. Critical infrastructure projects are what you see listed there. Up until our previous meeting, we felt it was the third ice pad was going to be one where we would need financing for sure in place for it to happen that's outside of the levy. So we do, as you said, take it quite seriously. We wouldn't just issue debt for any initiative. But again, the debt management strategy will speak to that. Council will have input into their thoughts on whether our strategy for where we would take on debt and the forms of debt that we would issue are consistent with your thoughts and feelings on behalf of the constituents, and we look forward to those discussions in Q2.
Thank you very much. Any additional questions, councillors? Councillor Wilkinson?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Just looking for some more information regarding, we take on debt for something like Snyder's Road reconstruction, which is a regional road. I know that we do have some infrastructure involved underneath. I'm just curious if there's any insight into what the approximately 1.3 was used for, just so I can have an understanding of why we're taking on debt for a regional road.
Sure. I'll approach that one first through you, Chair Salonen. A large portion of the costs associated with that project, as you noted, are for the underground infrastructure, water and sanitary, which are the responsibility of the lower tier municipality. A large proportion of the costs of water and sanitary on that project were funded through development charges as they were considered growth related. With the status of our development charges reserve funds, we didn't have the cash flow in place to cover those costs. It was part of the larger debt issuance for DC related costs. But again, it has to do with the underground infrastructure, which we're ultimately responsible for. I'm not sure if my colleague Molyneux has anything to add to that.
Through you, Chair. Typically with regional infrastructure, we try to align construction timing because it is more cost effective for us to replace our assets at the same time. Typically, we would look at condition of the assets that are in place as well, and to make a more informed decision. And we are going to want to align, we'll say, the construction timing of our asset with theirs, as it is, like I said, more cost effective, as we normally would have to pay for restoration of any infrastructure in the right of way if we were to proceed on our own.
Thank you very much. Follow-up question, Councillor Wilkinson?
Yeah, just as a follow-up, I know that it's funded through DCs and that's why it was taken out as debt. What about tapping into our infrastructure reserve funds that we collect through the user pay? Was there a reason that wasn't pursued, or what was the reasoning behind that?
Sure. Another great question. So for projects that are deemed growth related, and you'll get a better understanding of this through our 10-year capital forecast coming up. Just because a project's deemed growth related does not indicate that 100% of the costs are able to be funded through development charges. So for that project specifically, a proportion of the overall costs to the township were growth related and funded through the DC. The remaining proportion is funded through our infrastructure reserve funds. It's clear within legislation we cannot touch the levy for anything to do with user pay pieces, but you'll get a better understanding of that split between DC funding and infrastructure reserve funds for that infrastructure.
Thank you. Any additional questions, councillors? Okay, seeing no more questions, I will now call the vote. All of those in favor? And that's passed unanimously. And moving along to 12.5, the recommendation that pursuant of Ontario Regulation 284-09, Report COR 2023-08, serve as a method for communicating the exclusion of estimated amortization expenses from the 2023 municipal budget. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson. May I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Dunstall. I will now call on Mr. Kelly to again introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chair Salonen. This report has been considered historically as more of a housekeeping report, but given this is the first time seeing it for this term of council, I think it's very important to understand that it is a legislative requirement that we report to the council that's approving a budget, excluded expenses from that budget. In the Township of Wilmot, alongside 99% of municipalities in Ontario, we do not budget for amortization, meaning we do not collect taxes to fund amortization of our assets. This report serves to let this council know that if you were to start budgeting for the amortization of our assets, it would equate to an extra approximately $6.13 million in tax revenue that we would be required to collect. It is a standard housekeeping report ensuring that our municipality does budget on a cash basis and does not budget for amortization, and making the council aware of that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, I would assume, and this is a layman's interpretation, so take it as that, I would assume that is why we have these different funds, so that on the one hand you don't account for depreciation, but on the other hand you build up a fund which will be utilized to replace an asset after its normal expiration.
Through you, Chair Salonen, excellent point. which I should have gave in my overview. Yes, the dedicated infrastructure levy, the theory behind that is it's building up the capacity that we're putting money in to make up for the fact that we don't budget for amortization. The approval of the 2.8% infrastructure levy this year helped to build that capacity within there, but a very good point. Thank you for raising it.
Any additional questions, colleagues? Seeing no more questions, I will now call to vote. All in favor? And that is also passed unanimously. Now to the fun part of the evening, I will call for an adjournment. The recommendation is that we now adjourn our meeting at 5:46 p.m. To meet again at the call of the mayor. May I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously, and we're adjourned.